Good morning. I hope you can grab your food and have a seat because we are starting 15 minutes late and we wanted to wait for the big crowd to come that we were expecting. So I know some of you have to get back to work early this morning, so we want to get started and not cut the time too much shorter. So good morning. I'm Rose Lee, and I'm co-chair of the Asian American Alumni Association of Princeton, DC Region, or A4P DC. I'm truly delighted to welcome you to our 2016 Summer Seminar Series on Civic Engagement by the Asian Pacific American Community. We're delighted to play host today to the International Leadership Foundation's Young Ambassadors who come from around the world to see democracy in action. And warmly welcome as well our fellow alumni, friends, and leaders of APA organizations. In these polarizing times, we need to find more ways to promote greater dialogue and understanding, including within and outside the APA community. So we selected topics and speakers who we think can broaden and deepen our understanding of the issues facing the APA population. This seminar series is organized by A4P DC under the auspices of the Princeton Club of Washington, with support from the Association of Princeton Graduate Alumni, the Association of Black Princeton Alumni, and the Office of Alumni Affairs. I want to thank several organizations for their generous financial support. DSFederal-IDEA Foundation, Sophia Parker is here, who's the head of that foundation. Thank you, Sophia. DS Federal allowed us to professionally videotape the entire series. I don't know if some of you have seen the first video. It was very well done, and we could not have done that without DS Federal's support. ILF for underwriting the participation of their interns, young ambassadors, and advisors, and so many other sponsors who contributed towards general operational support, including Seven Seas Restaurant. Corinna Shen is in the audience, who's the owner of Seven Seas. Thank you, Corinna. Asian Pacific Islander American Public Affairs Greater DC Chapter. Stan Tai is in the room. He's the president of APGA GDC. Thank you, Stan. The Korean Business Enterprise and the Maryland International Development Center, the Lee Educational Foundation, and AA Lead as our collaborator. And Surjit is here from AA Lead. Thank you, Surjit. Thanks also to the folks at National Capital Captioning, Contracting at NCC, who are doing a marvelous job with the video recordings. They really have gone over and beyond doing a top-notch job, so really pleased because it's something I don't have to worry about because they're worrying about all the details. I'm so excited about the program for today to hear from two extraordinary individuals who truly make extraordinary things happen for Asian Americans at both in our region and in the country. So to start us off, my wonderful A4P co-chair, Kitty Shudena, will introduce today's speakers. Thank you all for coming.
Good morning. It's wonderful to see all of you here. And I want to join Rose in thanking our sponsors and thanking our speakers today. I'm super eager to hear from both of you, and we'll make the introduction short as per your wishes. We had a fantastically successful kickoff 2 weeks ago with Jack Ten and Chris Liu, and we're so pleased that so many of you are joining us again in the conversation. Thank you, Rose, for being the force behind this series and a fabulous co-chair, fellow alum, and friend. And this is, truly a team effort, but it would not have happened without Rose. So special thanks to her. So once again, we have two accomplished leaders with us today. They will speak on the missing minority, model minority myth, how this serves to mask the diversity within the Asian and Pacific Islander community, suppress calls from many students who may not be achieving at the assumed level, and divide APIAs from other people of color. So very often what is seen as a compliment is in fact something that holds us back as a community, as individuals. Neil Horikoshi, as President and Executive Director, has grown the Asian Pacific Islander American Scholarship Fund into the nation's largest not-for-profit provider of college scholarships for APIAs. Neil, thank you so much. I know that you came back very recently from a long trip to join us, and we're all eager to hear from you today. Surjit Ahluwalia has stewarded Asian American Lead, or AA Lead, into a well-respected organization that serves many low-income APIA youths in our DC region. I first heard Surjit at an AA Lead celebration and was deeply inspired by her passion and love of the youths that you all serve. As you learn from Neil and Surjit on our topic of the day, also listen for insights about leadership. They drive successful organizations in service of APIA youth and community by using evidence and data-based decision-making, strategic implementation of scalable efforts, and investments in activities to achieve region and the mission. We are thrilled that you are both with us today. I now turn to Surjit to provide some framing remarks to start our conversation, one that we welcome all of you to participate in. Surjit?
Thank you, Kitty, and thank you, Rose, and thank you all for being here this morning. I know it is very early, so thank you for making the time to be here. So we are going to be talking today about the missing minority, and so we're talking about Asian Pacific Americans, but in particular low-income Asian Pacific Americans, which is a population that even goes under the radar in our own community. We both have built organizations that are scalable, that have models that are replicable, where we've used data to be able to grow our organizations. And at the root of it is about helping to build leaders across the spectrum of the population in the United States. We want a diverse spectrum of leaders, and we're starting really young. So in my case, when I think about leaders, I think about one of our youth, and I'll give you just a story so you can understand a little bit about the work of Asian American Lead. So Asian American Lead supports low-income and underserved Asian Pacific Americans in the region. So we're in DC, in Maryland, and Virginia. And we've grown the organization in recent years to be from about 300 youth to now about 550 youth, and we're serving youth on a regular basis. We're a big part of youth's lives. We're meeting elementary school youth every day, middle school, high school youth twice a week, so we're really connected to the youth. We're serving youth pre-K all the way up to community college, so it's over a long spectrum of their lives. So one of our youth is named Bothan, and I've known Bothan for over 5 years. He's been with AA Lead for 7 years. So he joined our middle school program. He was part of our high school program. Now he is with us as a part-time teacher for our summer program with our elementary school youth. And he's the story of the population that we're trying to serve. His family is from Bangladesh. They grew up in DC. His father works as a fast food restaurant manager. Bothan, when he did well in school, but when he asked for help, it was very hard to get it because he didn't stand out as somebody who needed help in school. So he was part of AA Lead to really help build his confidence, his ability to advocate for himself, and to get help with college preparation when the time came to it. So Bothan now is at the University of Kentucky, and he went to Kentucky not having been anywhere near that state at all. And he really credits AA Lead to giving him the confidence to go to a brand new place and to be able to make his way in the world with his own, really. And really, we helped him with all of the basics about applying for financial aid, and he chose that program because he liked the program, but because financially he got a great deal and it made sense for him to go there. And so, we really want to be able to help young people who aren't always given the opportunities to succeed to have those opportunities as well. And leadership is part of this continuum of we really want to help our young people. They're going to be the ones that are leading this country forward, so we need to start early on, as early as we can, to be able to help young people to lead. And when I think about leading the organization, I think also about our staff. We have a lot of staff who are the age of a lot of you in the audience, and we really want to help them be able to develop their skills and serve the organization, but become leaders for the future as well with whatever they decide to do. And so we're really trying to think about our donors, our supporters, our volunteers, anyone who's connected to the organization as finding their own place of leadership to be able to contribute to the organization, but to be able to contribute to our community overall. So you're going to hear a lot more from us today, but we really want to keep this open, so we'll be asking for a lot of questions later on. With that, I will turn it over to Neil.
So thank you very much, Surjit, and also again want to applaud Rose, as well as Kitty, for your leadership in providing this conversation today, and most importantly, to the sponsors who support this organization and today. Now, I run a scholarship fund, and you understand the framing of what the purpose of this conversation is. It's about leadership. It's about development. It's about what we've both done in our organizations to get to where we are today. So part of this, it's a conversation about the model minority myth. It's a conversation about scholarship. It's a conversation also about a word. A word is the Asian American, Native American Pacific Islander Serving Institution, or the word is AAPI-serving. So I want to frame the question regarding the challenge that I had when I took this job about 8 years ago. And I come from corporate America, so I'm totally unprepared for this job. So here in Washington, D.C., there's an important college that many of you have heard. It's Howard University. It's known as a very important historically black college university, HBCU. There's also something called the Hispanic Serving Institutions. There's also in the Native American community something called tribal colleges. But if I asked all of you, whether you're here in the US or based overseas, what is the Asian equivalent? Most people in the nation, and I've done the same presentation in the Pentagon and elsewhere, nobody knows what the Asian equivalent is of a serving institution. The question is why? Okay, so that's the profound question I'm posing back to you. As young leaders, going to college, figuring out where you're going to go in your lifetime, because that's what I faced. So I heard the word AAPISI for the first time a few weeks after I joined this job by a board member. And so this is a story also about the history of the Asian community. It's about advocacy. It's about data. And you've heard Surjit talk about data collection, the need for evidence-based research and information. So that's where I was some 8 years ago, trying to figure out, so what are we going to do? And the excuse in our community at the time was there's a lack of disaggregated data. So the question is, what does that mean, a lack of disaggregated data? So I have a question for all of you as students. How many Asian ethnicities are there in the US today? Primary ethnicities counted by the US Census. How many? Is it 10? Is it 20? Is it 30? Is it 50? Raise your hand. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. The answer is 48. There are over 1,000 sub-ethnicities. I just came back from Vietnam. I learned that there are 54 different sub-ethnicities in Vietnam alone. Many of you come from Taiwan. You know the other sub-ethnicities in your own country. Okay, they all live here in the US. So here's another important question. When I was growing up, I graduated from high school in the 70s. What was I to the US federal government? In other words, the US Census keeps track of all Asian Pacific Islander Americans as well as all Americans. So what were Asian Pacific Islander Americans, my mom and dad, had to check off? What box did they check off? The answer is other. And the question is why? Because in 1970, the entire population of the Asian Pacific Islander American community was a mere 1.5 million. So you understand the problem statement. And just as a sidebar trivia comment to all of you today, if you happen to come from the Middle East, like Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, any part of the Middle East, and you fill out a census in the US today, you check off other. It's actually white. So you see, data collection is really important, and as college students, as young professionals, you should be very skeptical of all data, all reports, because it matters. So what happened was in the US, and that wasn't until the 1980s, 1990s, and certainly the year 2000, that the US Census actually started keeping track of 48 different ethnicities, and in some cases, some sub-ethnicities. So it's about data collection. And in the United States, there was a policy that started, and we're not sure when, but there was a policy by the US federal government under the Department of Education that literally said Asians and Pacific Islander Americans are not included in minority serving institution designation. So as a race, as a community, we were entirely excluded by the US federal government. And this was the challenge. So it took leadership in Congress as early as 2002 for the first House resolution sponsored in that year by both the Senate as well as the House to drive legislation forward. And it wasn't until 2008 when the Higher Education Act of 2008 passed after many years of discussion, trying to get this word called AAPISI, again, Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander Serving Institution, onto a policy that said that we are eligible, like other minority serving institutions, for federal government funding. Federal government funding is extremely important, in part because it provides funding for education support, persistence, and ultimately success, meaning graduation. And as a sidebar, if I asked all of you, what is the typical graduation rate in the United States today for all students, the answer is about 40%. 40%. Asian Pacific Islander American students face the same fate as the rest of the nation, meaning about 40% if any of us graduate. In fact, by sub-ethnicity and by race, it gets pretty stark, because 50 to 65%, as an example, of all Native Hawaiian and all Southeast Asians never begin college. I'll repeat again, 50 to 65% of all Southeast Asians and all Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders never begin college. So you never get through the pipeline of actually graduating. So this is the reality of why a scholarship fund actually exists, because it's not only about access, but it's about persistence and ultimately graduation for all students in our community. Now, when you look at this bell curve of Asian Pacific Islander Americans, there's a stark reality regarding what we're dealing with. Many don't even graduate high school. Many actually begin college, but they drop out. And so what you end up at the end is a reality of what goes on in various communities, which is why some of the 48 ethnicities you never find the leaders. And that's part of what we try to do, which is why AA Lead is in place, which is why a scholarship fund is in place. So now I have a trivia question for you, and I have some of our publication outside. So everything we do is based on evidence. We do a lot of research so we can publicize it. So now if I asked you, there are 48 ethnicities in the US, primary ethnicities kept tracked by the US federal government. Who are the top 2 refugee groups, except for this past year, for the past 6 years prior to this past 6 years? Top 2 refugee groups. Now, you all read the newspaper. You know where there are war-torn countries in the world. So to the U.S., top 2 refugee groups to the U.S. I'll take any answers. Yes, sir. Iraq. Iraq, Syria, great. Okay, so that's today's information. Syria, you know what's going on there. Okay. Now, when I got that question posed to me by one of my employees some years ago, I said Afghanistan. I'm sorry, I said Iraq and Afghanistan. By the way, it's not Middle East. 2 Asian countries. Who are they? Yes, sir. Vietnam. Nope. By the way, that's a great answer. Many people answer that, and the reason is because you're thinking about 40 years ago. Okay? Yes, sir. Korea and China. No. Yes. Yes. And what? Yes. So we wrote a paper. I was on national television to talk about Burmese and Bhutanese. Okay? This is what we do in the nation today, because, and this is not 1 year. We stumbled across this because there was an article highlighted by one of our scholars who identified as being Karen. And my question was, who are the Karen? Right? These are sub-ethnicities, because many people coming from as refugees do not identify as countries. Countries is something that we identify as, or it's a political answer. But in terms of ethnicities, and again, all of you, if you live in Taiwan or Vietnam, any country, you know that there's sub-ethnicities. They identify with their true ethnic background. And this is the challenge that we have even running a scholarship fund today. So when we look at all of the diaspora that we deal with, we're trying to drive this to where we need to go. Now, another dimension. Half of all Asian Pacific Islander Americans in the nation today attend community colleges. Half. Okay, and by the way, when you look at other institutions, 43% of all Asian Pacific Islander Americans in the nation are highly clustered at AANAPISI campuses. And at the time we did our research, there were just 153 campuses. So 43% of all Asian Pacific Islander Americans in the nation attend just 153 campuses in the nation. They're primarily, by the way, state schools as well as community colleges. They're highly clustered in just 15 states. We did this research a few years ago. Today we know that there are now 273 AANAPISI campuses in 20 states. So you understand my target, what I'm doing, and how I'm leveraging myself. Today, because I know all of this information, and you've heard of Surjit talking about what we're doing as a leading organization today. I'm one now today in something called the S&I 100. Social Impact Exchange, S&I 100. We want to view it as one of the top 100 nonprofits in the nation today. And the reason is you have to be scale ready, scale worthy, and being justified to get this position. Now, what are we doing to scale? So if I know the states, I know the cities, I know the institutions, I know where students are highly clustered, and by definition, you have to have 10% or more Asian Pacific Islander Americans, half of whom have to be Pell Grant eligible. Pell Grant eligible meaning low income and having ability to receive funds from the federal government to attend college. So by definition, if these are where I know I'm going to go to, I can develop then my fundraising strategy to find the donors, the corporations, the foundations around where these institutions are located. And because we're growing at such a fast rate, we're the fastest growing community in the US. When we started this journey a few years ago, there were 116 AANAPISI campuses. I gave you the last number, 273 today, and that's just in a few years. This number will continue to grow, and the fastest number of AANAPISI campuses are not on the East Coast or West Coast, they're in the Midwest. And why the Midwest? Is because that's where immigration is heading to from our community. So if I know all of this, I can create the interventions, I can create the plans and strategies by which we can best support the community. So let me stop there. I'm going to pass this back over to Surjit, because what we want to do is now open it up for other conversations.
Thank you, Neil. Lots of really interesting tidbits that I've learned, and scrolling down some notes. So we'd like to open it up for questions now. I'm going to start with a question or two for Neil, but if you have questions, please just come up to the microphone and feel free to ask us. It's a good-sized group, so there is time for a lot of you to ask some questions. But to start out, you gave a lot of interesting facts that are maybe surprises to some of us in the room, and I'm sure surprises to people you are talking about Bhutanese and Burmese refugees being the most frequent refugees before this year, about that 40% of Asian Americans and people in this country in general graduate, only 40%. So how, when you're going out and talking about the work of API-SF, and when you are trying to get people drawn to your cause, how often do you feel that people are surprised about the data that you're sharing?
100% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
In part because there's this word, right? It's an unfortunate word. It's called the model minority myth. This model minority myth is this concept that most of the nation, if they don't know about the data, they don't know about the information, all what they find out is that their doctors, their pharmacists, their professionals happen to be Asians, so they believe that all Asians are well-to-do, highly educated, and that they forget about the other groups of Asians who happen to be the working class group, the blue-collar group, those that don't have the education. And I'll just give you, one example, right? It's highly clustered in, for instance, Arkansas. There's a company, that supports the Marshallese. They live in area Bentonville, Rogers, outside of Arkansas, and it's about 20% of the entire island population are located in one city. It's one of the few places where there's actually an embassy in Arkansas from the Marshall Islands. And the question is, what do they do? And they work for the Tyson's, which is the raising of chickens, slaughtering of the chickens, and packing of the chickens. And it's the opportunity that was given to that community. So you find these pockets of Asian groups that are starting up in various parts of the U.S. And this is another myth that goes on, right? Because in most major cities in California, Los Angeles, San Francisco, you find a wide range of various ethnicities, but in some Midwest cities, it may be one or two Asian ethnicities, and it's not just the Chinese, Japanese, Korean, communities. You'll find these other groups, the Burmese, the Bhutanese. Richland College, the president who helped support the creation of this publication in Dallas, Texas, she supports of all the Asians there, they're Burmese and Bhutanese, because there's a cluster of a relocation community right outside her college. So that's the new America, right? And when you think about historically black colleges, minority-served institutions, colleges are there to support the various communities that are right in the area. And so as we look at the demographic shifts, it is quite profound and quite dramatic, and various cities have different Asian communities around each city. And we see it based upon the census data. So we drill down quite highly into the census information to do what we do today.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to ask another question, but I hope some of you will join us at the microphone soon. So I want to switch gears a little bit to the leadership question. You mentioned at the beginning that you are from the corporate sector, and that I think you said that you were totally unprepared for this job, which I'm sure is not true. But I would love to hear a little bit about what you see as the differences from leading in the corporate sector to leading in the nonprofit sector. What have been the biggest differences, the biggest challenges from making that switch?
So great question. So, you know, I worked in a large international company. I lived both in Asia and here in the US. I'm a lawyer, but I also ran global business development. And if you think about working in the corporate sector, you know, it's revenue and profit, right? And ultimately shareholder protection and you know, increasing shareholder value. So the metrics in corporate America are pretty straightforward of what one needs to do. In this nonprofit arena, it is far more difficult a role and job, because it's not only the funding source, but you literally live and can literally fold an organization if you don't have sustainable revenue. But there's two kinds of revenue. One kind of revenue is restricted funds, the other is unrestricted funds. Restricted funds means if I get funds for specific programmatic support, I'm obligated, and you have to be transparent to the reporting structures and so forth about how you apply those funds. You need unrestricted funds to be successful. Unrestricted fund means then you can operate, you have enough overhead to run an organization. So there's no profit motive involved, right? You have to figure that part out. And then it's also source of funds and creating the right value proposition that makes sense of what you're doing, whether it's for what you do, you know, Surjit and Alito, what I do running a scholarship fund. And you know, many of us running nonprofits today, you know, face this hurdle and the challenge of this model minority myth that most people don't believe what Surjit does and certainly what I do. That there's even a need in our community to allow students to go to college or to build leadership programs. So we face these large hurdles, and so it's hard to get over these hurdles to do what we do, but yet we do the best we can. And again, for me, it's about evidence-based research, constant evidence-based research, which drives ourselves forward because it becomes a conversation. It's new news to whoever I speak to, and with the hope that they come along with what we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. I would totally agree about this issue of the model minority myth being the primary challenge in terms of raising funds for our organization, and for yours, I'm sure, too, because that is just the predominant narrative in this country, that Asian Americans are all doing well. And, you know, I'm never wanting to be in the position of saying Asians versus other people. That's not beneficial to me or anyone else, but it is saying that there are real needs in our community, and if I'm running an organization that is effective, isn't that sufficient? Low-income people are low-income people, and can we be able to support low-income people? So I would agree with that very much. I wanted to know also, beyond the model minority myth, what would you say is the biggest challenge about being in this space of trying to provide scholarships to Asian American Pacific Islander students? What are the biggest challenges that you see in your work on a regular basis?
So I start with you know, data, and one of the first questions I asked you was how many ethnicities are there in the United States today? So to understand there are 48 and over 1,000 sub-ethnicities, there's always this challenge about, you know, inclusivity, right? That how do I converse with all of you, even in this room, about 48 different cultures, 48 different identities, 48 different communities, all of which are extremely different. And you know, the Asian Pacific Islander American community in the US today is viewed as very, very heterogeneous, right? In other words, it's hard to bring us all together, you know, as one community, to say that there's a need for the Asian Pacific Islander American community because the Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians believe they're so distinct from even Asian Americans. And when you look at all Asian Americans, they view themselves as different cultures, right? And if you know about the history of all the Asian, Pacific Island American cultures, you know that historically, all the Asian countries fought each other. I learned about that. In fact, I learned something. I said, this is a real trivia question, right? So I learned what Siem Reap is, in Cambodia. You know what the term Siem Reap means? It means Thailand defeated. It was something that was profound to me. And so when I spoke to some of my Cambodians, I said, I learned that, and I was very profoundly moved. Siem Reap means Thailand defeated that city and country. And yet that's the name of the country today. So when you look at all of this, there's always this tension and there's always this feeling. And so when you come to the United States, when we try to galvanize everyone, it's not until the last decade or so that our entire community came together. And so I'll share with you, and this is a trivia comment, right, to many of you, internationally as even nationally. How and why did the Asian community come together? And even for my organization, I'm only a 13-year-old organization. When I started this organization, when I started with this scholarship fund running it, it was the 5th year of a scholarship fund. And so while the United Negro College Fund, Hispanic Scholarship Fund, American Indian College Fund are all minimum 30 to 40, and in the UNCF's case, 70, 80 years old, we're only a mere 13 years old today. So the question is why? Why wasn't there not Asian leadership in advocacy or other areas? And part of it is this dichotomous view of Asian communities sort of are isolated, right? You have OCA, Organization of Chinese American or Advocates, JACL, Japanese American Citizens League, right? You have CIRAC, you have every single group by ethnicity, and we're never together, but we're one that's all together. I talk about it as one. So to me, this is a big challenge. And the question, is what galvanized the community some years ago? And there's a seminal case that you should just be aware of, and it's called the Vincent Chin case. The Vincent Chin case started in 1984. It was a case where the U.S. auto workers were out of work for many years outside of Detroit, and this was a real problem. So people were very disgruntled, and a gentleman named Vincent Chin was actually killed in Detroit. The people who killed him they were trying to kill a Japanese person because the Japanese auto manufacturers were violently taking over the world in selling automobiles. Vincent Chin was killed, and that's when all of a sudden, Asian communities came together to realize that to the rest of the world, we all look the same. And that's a startling reminder, right, of why we need to come together as a community. So till today, to me, one of our largest concerns has always been how do we bring the community together to really deal with all the advocacy issues together with what needs to be done as a whole for our community overall, which is what I'm for.
Mm-hmm. And I would agree that's a big challenge. And what has changed is I think that then the younger generation much more easily sees themselves as part of the Asian American framework where, my father would not consider himself Asian American. That's something that I have fallen into, and I think a lot of younger people see that much more naturally because of understanding the power in numbers and what it means to be attached to a larger group of people and set of commonalities. So are there any questions that we can answer from the audience? Please come up to the microphone.
So one thing I was wondering about, so I guess I'll introduce myself.
Yes,
I'm Nicholas Wu, I'm an advising junior at Princeton, and I'm here this summer with the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. So one thing I was wondering was, in talking about all of these different ethnic groups and data disaggregation, what sort of challenges have you faced in education, especially with the kinds of programs that AA Lead runs, with different immigrant groups, and I'm sure especially different levels of English learning and language?
Sure. So thanks for your question. There is a big challenge with, as Neil was saying, the vast diversity of Asian people in this country. And so my organization is serving youth from about 20 Asian ethnicities. So we are not at the 48, but a pretty diverse group of people. And we have many who are speaking English, who are second generation in the U.S., but many that are brand new to this country. And, I think the biggest thing is around language is that you come into a new school system, you're one of very few people who speaks the language that you speak in this area, and then how do you navigate, how do you get the support that you need in school? And so we see a lot of young people who are coming and they are really just struggling at the elementary school level. There's a lot of acting out because you don't understand, right? As a child, you're trying to figure out, what am I doing here? Why can't anyone understand me? Why can't I communicate what I need to them? And then in terms of our schools, when our schools, so in DC, we have a Language Access Act where the government is required to provide services in language, but that doesn't always happen. So, and how do you have some conversations with a parent about your child acting out in school in a language using a translator on the phone? That's very difficult to do, right? So I think that's a big issue that we see, is that the language access, when we do enforce language access and allowing translation to happen, it's still very difficult to have important conversations. So we see that our young people are really trying to struggle to articulate what they need. Our families are not able to understand a lot of what's happening. So AALEAD's trying to fill the gap that, if a report card comes home and you don't know what it says, then how can you provide the support that your child might need? If you're working long hours at low-paying jobs and your child is trying to navigate a new system, and it's a system you don't know anything about, it's very difficult for you to be able to provide support. So I would say that, what AALEAD is doing is trying to provide that additional support. The big other issue that's not directly education related, but it is what we're seeing, and the national data supports this also, about mental health needs, that there's strong mental health needs in our community. Asian American girls have the highest rates of suicidal thoughts. Asian American kids are bullied the most in school. And so when you're trying to figure out what kinds of supports you need and you're not able to access those, plus you have high expectations in many cases from your families, we came to the United States so you could get a good education, that creates a lot of pressure and it makes it really difficult for our young people. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for your interesting presentations. My name is Thomas Chen, Princeton 09. I'm currently Policy Advisor at the U.S. Department of Treasury. My question is, I was wondering if either of you could expound on your policy advocacy role through your organizations, and one of the contentious issues that might actually even divide the AAPI community that I'm thinking about is affirmative action. And how do you work with your communities to sort of advocate on their behalf and work with different stakeholders to on these important issues? Thank you.
So thank you. So first, let me explain that as a scholarship fund, in terms of my tax status, by definition, I am not an advocacy organization. So I want you to understand, how I do my work and do it successfully. Outside you see a whole series of publications. If you go to our website, from the year I started in 2008 till today, we have dozens of research papers. And most recently, I collaborate with College Board as well as ACT. And I think all of you know that these are national clearinghouses for the SAT program as well as the ACT testing. They have a wealth of data as well. And by holding a wealth of data, by partnering with them, you'll see one of our most recent publications in partnership with ACT is a paper regarding Asian Americans and their college readiness together with Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders. And by working with them and publishing these two separate reports, in a nutshell, it highlights disaggregation of data. So I didn't need federal legislation to do it because sources that have much data provided that data and information. And in net, so you understand, if ACT didn't do this, as an example, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders would have been blended in with Asian Americans and lost, totally lost in the data, because it would have been a rounding error. Okay, so what happens is, by showing the Pacific Islander research papers, a separate, entirely separate document, it shows that they are woefully unprepared as a whole to go to college. In net. right? And so ACT today is working with all the other communities to then disaggregate data. So by when I talk about advocacy, what I'm doing is I'm talking about educating the nation through research, which is how I'm allowed to go out and talk about information. By educating the nation about what we're doing becomes advocacy. And this is an important strategy because I'm not an advocacy organization. I'm not out there to change the world. I'm not there to lobby federal law, but I'm there to highlight what's needed. And this notion about data disaggregation, just to put in perspective, you had Senator Mazie Hirono as well as Congressman Mike Honda in the Congress to drive a All Students Count Act, which was all about federal disaggregation of data legislation for the U.S. To support the Asian Pacific American community. It didn't pass, but someday, you know, there's a view that it should pass. But in the meantime, if I can work with AANAPISI campuses to get chancellors and organizations, as well as the 280 institutions that I work with to disaggregate the data on their own on campus, and then create intervention plans by community, then I'm doing everything I can to change a lot of things. In other words, I'm starting at the other end as opposed to the advocacy side, is how I'm doing it net-net. I think it becomes an important segue in a learning lesson regarding how we can kind of do a lot of different things without being that, you know, advocacy, organization itself. I also think, you know, what I've highlighted again, you know, how research drives a lot of things that we do. You know, foundations, organizations, and funders thirst for what they call evidence-based data that drives everything we do. So one of our other research papers, and if you think about this, it becomes an important point, right? So I run programs, persistence programs, as does AA Lead, and every organization, whether you look at our organization, the Asian community, you look at any community. The question will always arise, how do you know that's the program that your community wants? How do you know that? So what we did was we ran a survey with all of our scholars, and we have 6,000 scholars, you know, since inception. Plus, which is heading towards 8,000 now. But we asked them in 2009 and 2011 a whole series of questions about what do you want, what do you need, what are the gaps, what do you think you need to be successful in your life? Well, one of them, which is the purpose of this conversation today, is about leadership development skills. So we ran a survey, we published it, it's one of our papers outside, and you can download it from our research tab. And it's about a scholar need assessment survey, and I've made it publicly available to anybody who wants to use it, because for the first time we know what Asian Pacific American students want, both in 2009 and 2011. Different groups of students responded to those surveys, but guess what? It was identical. Now, one of the things we're doing is we're going to update it again for this coming year in 2016, with the hope that, did it change? Did anybody make a dent, or is it still the same? You see, so then if we know that these are the needs of students, anybody who asks me, why do you do what you're doing? The answer is, because this is the evidence-based data and research to drive what we're doing today. Which is why we're very credible in terms of what I say, how we do it, in terms of at least foundation funders who thirst for that data. Because without it, they won't fund you. You see, so that's what I do as a whole. So thank you.
Thank you. More questions?
So my name is Jennifer, and I go to Purdue University, which is in the Midwest. And so I'm really involved in the Asian American community there. And I was wondering, since you were talking about how the Asian community seems to be really like heterogeneous and we're very like separated. And I noticed that at our university, maybe it's like kind of a microcosm of like the greater society overall. But we have a lot of trouble trying to bring together the different Asian organizations that represent different ethnicities. And so as a result, as I was vice president internal of the Asian American Association, so we were trying to bring together the whole community by hosting the Midwest Asian American Students Union Conference at our school. And so by through like activities like these, I was wondering, like, beyond that, what advice you would have for someone like me who's trying to bring together and unify our community, what things student leaders can do on campus to try to bring that together.
So would you like to take that?
Sure. So it's a great question. And a lot of our youth have been participating in the East Coast Asian American Student Union Conference. So it's great that you're a part of that. I think, the thing that I would suggest is trying to figure out what those issues are that are in common across these groups. So I think doing an event is a great way to try to get people working on something together. But if there's something that is coming up on your campus that a lot of people can connect to, or all of these events that are happening in our world today, to be able to focus on one that can try to bring people together, and starting some dialogue and conversation about ways in which these organizations can work together. Because I think there's a lot of wonderful things about all of us doing work separately and celebrating our own traditions and our own backgrounds, but really talking about how we can do both, hold the space for ourselves and our own communities, but then be welcoming of other communities. And I think, beyond the Asian community, one of the things that AA Lead has been trying to do, and this is led by our youth, is wanting to do cross-cultural, cross-racial work, to be able to be confident in our own communities, but it doesn't just stop there. It's about being able to lead across communities as well. Did you want to add anything?
I got one word. So, but before I give you the one word, I have to give you the background, right? because it's not that I have all kinds of advice for everyone, but I've worked internationally, my whole life. And for some of you who will get into the international arena, it's something that I think becomes really important, right? It's the art of conversation, it's the art of networking, it's the art of working with others cross boundaries in any country I worked in. So I've worked in many countries. So my one word to you is food. Trust me, right? And the question is why, right? I guarantee if you ever ask any Asian, anybody, one question is, where do you want to go for dinner? Think about that, right? I have never had anybody not talk to me. And then you can't have that person stop talking, right? Now, I lived in Japan, and my daughter, went to an international school. The thing that got everybody together, and there was a very, expat, international kind of community. These international fairs and things that bring together, so you don't have to talk about the issues that are in front of you today, right? But how do you bring people together? I guarantee you, it's food. And we all come together for some reason, and I go to any kind of food-related event. I'm sorry, but I do. Right? If you start that way, particularly at a place like Purdue, I know Mitch Daniels is there, right? Your college president. Your college president is Mitch Daniels.
Yes.
Right? I mean, you get him to attend, and you'll start moving the needle in a place like even Purdue.
We actually, similar to food related, the Asian American Association hosted our first annual night market last year.
Yeah.
That's great.
We put it together to try to bring together a lot of the Asian orgs so they could each have a table. And then we usually have a Taste of Asia event as well. But we're also trying to bring more advocacy, because I feel not a lot of Asian students, especially in the Midwest, who grew up being the only Asian student in their whole high school or something, they don't really not everyone really is aware of all the issues that are going on. So I actually did host a meeting for one of our Asian American Association meetings where we had a speaker talk about the Vincent Chin incident and about other Asian American advocacy, model minority kind of issues. So, I mean.
I think there's two groups that you're focused on, right? Because I heard your question. It's about how you bring all the Asian community together. But I think you have to kind of expand that lens. And the analogy is for us to get this policy change, this AANAPISI policy change, it wasn't just the Asian Pacific Un-American community. I reached out across the boundaries to the African American, Hispanic, Native American community. So all my research paper outside, my advisory council consists of all the other ethnicities. And the question is, why is that important? It's because they become your biggest cheerleaders. Right? If you got the biggest possible group of cheerleaders in your repertoire of what you want to do, then you're doing it. But it starts somewhere, and by starting at some point by getting what you did, and then invite all your friends so that they begin learning about it, right? And the Asian American history in the United States is a pretty troubling one. And just so that we get the lens together, there's a Chinese Exclusion Act. Japanese Americans were interned during World War II. There's some really troubling laws that till today the nation has to heal for a lot of that, and it goes on. So it's educating, because a lot of the nation today, your classmates even, I'm sure, if you talk to the nation, never learned Asian American history. So they don't know, so it starts somewhere around food or something that brings them together. You spend the time Normanetta was one of them.
Mhm.
As an example. And then, good luck.
Oh, thank you.
And there's something really resonated about what you said, so I just thought I would share that. You mentioned that many students at Purdue, they're the only Asian student in their high school, and so I think that that really connects to my experience, and one thing that I've tried to build with Asian American Lead is that I was one of very few Asian students in my high school. My mother is white American, my father is from India, so I don't have a traditional Asian experience, whatever that means, right? So
Relative.
I think that there's so many different cultures, so many
Uh-huh.
different people that are part of this community. So one thing I would say is really trying to focus with your group of creating a really open culture, that we're not about one thing, that you are who you are and you're part of it. Because for me, frankly, going into college where it was a more diverse environment, there were a lot of assumptions about what I should be like, and so I didn't feel comfortable in the Asian American space. It was much later that I came into this space because I didn't feel like I had the same experiences as some of the other Asians. So I would just add that, to think about just being, everyone's welcome, no matter what your experience.
Yeah, we're really trying to work on doing that at our school, I think. We just established the Asian and Asian American Resource and Cultural Center last year as well. So our new director was helping us, like you said, disaggregating the data about the Asian ethnicities at our school and also trying to bring everyone together. So thank you for your advice, though.
Thank you. Rose.
I have a question for Neil, because I've heard Neil say things like, oh, I was totally unprepared for this, even though he has a 30-year career at IBM, he's globe-trotting, if any network to the hilt. So what do you think you're lacking, and what would you have done differently knowing now what you know?
So I still don't know a lot of different things about higher education. One of the unique things is when I start to look at, for instance, my counterpart at United Negro College Fund, he's a former college president. Many of the leaders in higher education, happen to run institutions. I never had that. But here's where I found it to be sort of unique. These roles, it requires you to be a very quick learner. So this notion about being a 21st century learner, right? And if you look up p21.org for the students, it's this rainbow of understanding. Just college education is just one aspect, but you need technical skills, social skills. You need to understand critical thinking skills, and you have to be a lifelong learner. So I've embarked on this role of being like a lifelong learner. I've been invited to sit on the board, as an example, of the Institute for Higher Education Policy, an organization that actually sets policy framework for the United States. I sit amongst other college presidents and other leaders in higher education, yet I don't have that kind of background. So I learn from them, but by learning from them, it's the concept of what I view as very important today, which is I happen to be a representative. I'm invited to the table. I go to many meetings in the United States today, and I look around and I'm the only Asian American in the whole room amongst 300 plus people. And I worry about that because in the past, my guess is if I wasn't invited, the answer is there's no Asian representative. And it's a lonely job, when you take a look at what I just told you, right? This is higher education in the United States, and we're not invited overall. So I view it as, for me, I hold a heavy responsibility to articulate what I just told you in any forum that I attend, as an invitee, as a guest, whether it's College Board, ACT, any of the foundations and so forth. My problem is I don't have enough time for all of this. But my role there is essential because I'm the sole voice in many, many, many meetings because there's nobody else around. And hence that's one of my challenges, and am I prepared for it? The answer is no, because we just don't have enough bandwidth. So those are the things that I see.
So last question, please join us.
Actually, I have two questions.
Okay.
Is that okay?
We'll see.
Okay, good morning. My name is Jason Chen, and I'm from Taiwan. Yeah, so my first question is that, have you ever run into any cases that the subject who could really use the organization's help, but simply just refuse to get the support from you? So if you met into this kind of cases, how would you persuade them to gain your support? Because there's a lot of people who have potentials, but simply just doesn't realize the potentials. And my second question is that I believe that in your work there's a lot of communication between different community in America, different cultural communities. So why are you like communicating with them to like trying to merge in together into like one big society, like peacefully? Like you said, we would have been in war during our history a long time. So why are you trying to merge in together? Were you also trying to like increase their awareness for their culture, for the traditional culture? Because like I know there's a lot of people, a lot of Asian, especially Chinese and Taiwanese, when they admire their Western, while they're admiring their Western culture, they'll also be forgetting their traditional values. So we're also trying to increase their awareness.
Great, thank you. So I'll answer your first question very briefly, and then Neil, you can have the last word. Yes, we do meet people. You have to meet people where they are, and not everybody is ready for the help that you want to give them at that point in time. There are a ton of barriers, and you got to help people work through their barriers at their own pace. So it's challenging, but we can't make decisions for people, right? They have to make their own decisions.
So, regarding your last question about galvanizing and bringing communities together, I think that's always going to be, to some extent, a work in progress. And so forget even, what I do. I know that many cities, because I've been going to various cities, I find that even chambers of commerces, in other words, Asian businesses, are separated by ethnicities. So chambers have to try to get together as well, our business community. Because by working together, it's far more successful than by doing it alone, by ethnicity. So again, I view it as a lot of work in progress. Much more work is ahead, and it's a start. And I think it starts with all of you as young leaders knowing where you are, and when you take these positions one day, how are you going to bring it all together? Thank you.
This has just been a fantastic conversation. I have to say, Neil and Sujit, you did not disappoint. We learned so much from you. And I think that it's particularly instructive to hear about the importance of disaggregating data and at the same time expanding the circle to bring people together. I think that having so many ILF fellows today is a real plus. As well as our fellow Princeton alums and current students of Princeton University. I think that you are the people we look to in the future so that Neil will not be alone in that room with other higher ed presidents. And I think we all have a part in shaping that future. So thank you again so much for stimulating our thinking, and we very much hope that there will have many chances to hear from you again in the future and to learn from you. So let's give Sujit and Neil another round of applause.
And thank you, Rose and Kitty, for your role in leadership. Thank you.
Thanks to all of you again for bringing your thoughts and energy to this event. Thanks for a really fabulous discussion, and I learned a lot from hearing you. Let's stay connected in learning and action, and I wanted to please invite you to join us for the next 2 seminars, same time, same place. The seminar on July 20th focuses on Asians giving for good. We've got 3 terrific speakers traveling from New York and Seattle who will discuss Asian American giving, the who, the what, the where, and the how, emerging philanthropy trends in both America and Asia, with Princeton University being one of the more favored recipients, and the challenges of finding sponsors for nonprofits trying to help Asians in America. The 4th and final seminar on August 3rd looks at the future of the Asian American electorate, recognizing that the number of Asian voters will double by the year 2040, and explores ways to exert greater influence in civic matters by Asian Americans. So we hope you'll join us and contribute to the discussion during these seminars and in your own communities. So thank you so much for coming, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.